There is a type of man that Hollywood has always struggled to hold on to. Not the ones who needed the camera, who fed on applause, who built their entire identity around the reflection the screen gave back to them, but the ones who could take it or leave it, who showed up, did the work with uncommon skill, and then disappeared back into a life the studio had no access to. William Holden was that type, and it made him, paradoxically, one of the most compelling presences the screen has ever known. He was born William Franklin Beadle, Jr. on April 17, 1918, in O'Fallon, Illinois, and raised in Pasadena, California, in a family that was comfortable, conventional, and entirely unconnected to show business. He stumbled into acting almost by accident, discovered while performing in a college play, signed by Paramount before he had any particular ambition to be signed, renamed William Holden because the studio thought Beadle sounded wrong on a marquee. He was 20 years old, blonde, broad-shouldered, with a face that was handsome in an uncomplicated American way. Hollywood took one look at him and decided he was a golden boy. He spent the first decade of his career being exactly that. The studio system dressed him up and pointed him at cameras and called him a star, and he was a star, but a particular kind of unease lived underneath the golden surface. He was intelligent enough to see the machinery clearly, to understand what he was to the studios, what role he was being asked to play both on screen and off. And the understanding made him restless in a way that no amount of professional success could quiet. Then came Sunset Boulevard in 1950, directed by Billy Wilder, and everything changed. Holden played Joe Gillis, a broke and cynical screenwriter who falls into the orbit of a faded silent film star played by Gloria Swanson, and what he brought to the role was something that no amount of golden boy charm could have manufactured: a bone-deep weariness, a moral ambiguity, a sense of a man who has assessed his own compromises with clear eyes and found them wanting. It was the performance of a man who knew exactly what it felt like to be used by an industry that commodified people without apology. He wasn't entirely acting. The film made him a different kind of star, darker, more complex, more interesting than the studios had planned for him to be. And then, 3 years later, came the role that would define his legacy in the eyes of the Academy. Stalag 17, again directed by Billy Wilder, cast him as Sefton, a prisoner of war in a German camp who operates as a cynical, self-interested opportunist, trading with the guards, keeping his head down, making the best of a situation that his fellow prisoners find morally intolerable. It was not a hero, it was not a villain, it was something more truthful than either, a man who had decided that survival mattered more than the approval of people whose approval he had never much valued anyway. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1954. His acceptance speech was 3 words: "Thank you, thank you." He sat down. The audience, accustomed to the elaborate gratitude of Hollywood acceptance speeches, didn't quite know what to do. It was entirely in character. But the real William Holden, the one that the camera could only approximate, existed most fully away from the screen. He had fallen in love with Africa in the early 1950s, when he visited the continent for the first time and experienced something that people who have felt it describe with a consistency that suggests it is real, a sense of recognition, of having arrived somewhere the soul had been looking for without knowing it. He returned again and again. He bought land in Kenya. He co-founded the Mount Kenya Safari Club, a luxury lodge on the slopes of Mount Kenya that became one of the most celebrated retreats in the world, and that Holden used not merely as a business venture, but as a base of operations for something he cared about with a seriousness that surprised everyone who thought they knew him. Wildlife conservation. In an era when the word barely existed as a mainstream concern, when Africa's wildlife was still widely regarded as a resource to be hunted rather than a heritage to be protected, William Holden was putting his money, his time, and his considerable international celebrity behind the idea that the animals were worth alive than dead. He helped establish the African Wildlife Foundation. He brought journalists and politicians and fellow celebrities to Kenya and showed them what was being lost. He was not performing concern. He was a man who had found something real to care about in a life that Hollywood had tried to fill with things that were not real, and he held on to it with both hands.
The contradiction between the cynical screen persona and the genuine idealist underneath it was not a contradiction to those who knew him. The cynicism was real. He had earned it in a studio system that commodified people without apology. But the idealism was equally real, rooted in a part of him that the studios had never reached and never understood. He once said that he felt more himself driving across the Kenyan savanna at dawn than he ever had on any film set. The animals did not care who he was. The landscape did not require a performance. He could simply be a man in the world, which was, in the end, what he had always wanted. He worked steadily through the 1950s and 1960s, making films that ranged from the brilliant to the commercial, always bringing more to the work than the work sometimes deserved. Picnic, The Bridge on the River Kwai, Sabrina, film after film that confirmed his position as one of the most reliable and quietly extraordinary actors of his generation. And then, in 1969, Sam Peckinpah cast him in The Wild Bunch, and Holden gave what many critics consider his greatest performance, an aging outlaw watching the world he understood disappear, too old for what was coming and too honest to pretend otherwise. It was, again, not entirely fiction. The drinking that had been part of his life since early adulthood became heavier as he aged. He was not the first actor to use alcohol as a way of managing the particular psychological cost of a life lived in public, of a self that was perpetually being borrowed by the industry and returned slightly damaged. He drove drunk and was involved in a fatal car accident in Italy in 1966, a fact that haunted him for the rest of his life. He spoke about it rarely, but those who knew him said it changed something in him permanently, added a weight to the already considerable weight he carried. He died on November 12, 1981, alone in his apartment in Santa Monica, California. He had fallen, struck his head on a bedside table, and bled out. He was 63 years old. His body was not discovered for 4 days. It was the kind of ending that the gossip columns described as tragic, and it was, but not for the reasons they named. The tragedy was not the solitude, it was the 4 days. The 4 days in which one of the most fascinating men of the 20th century lay undiscovered, because fame had given him everything except the ordinary human tether of someone who would notice when he was gone. He left behind a legacy that is more complex and more interesting than most of Hollywood's golden boys ever managed. The films, yes, but also the land in Kenya, the animals that still run across it, the foundation that still operates in his name. The idea that a movie star could look at the world and find something in it worth protecting that had nothing to do with his own reflection. He was the golden boy who turned out to have real gold in him, in the places that didn't shine.